In Isaiah chapter 9, we have a wonderful verse that has been identified from the New Testament authors as a verse in part talking about the Messiah to come, and that is Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. And so in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, we are giving 4 names about the coming Messiah, and over the next few weeks, we're going to take a few minutes to talk about each of these 4 names. Here's what it says in verse 6. It says, "For a child will be born for us, a son will be given to us, and the government will be on his shoulders. He will be named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace." Now, in these next few minutes, we're going to specifically talk about this first name given to the Messiah to come, and that is a Wonderful Counselor. Now, here's the thing about a counselor. In our day and age, when we think of a counselor, we think of something differently than what the biblical authors would have thought about. For us today, we think of a counselor as somebody we go and talk to, and we sit on their couch and we tell them all of their problems. In biblical times, a counselor was more thought of as a king with his council. So a king would have problems and issues, and a good and a wise king would have good and wise counselors that would give him feedback and opinions on what to do in various situations. And of course, in their age and in their wisdom, hopefully they had gone through some of these situations before, and so they knew what to say and advice to give to the king. And so with that in mind, knowing Jesus is our wonderful counselor who cares for us and loves us, it brings us to what it says in Hebrews chapter 4. In Hebrews chapter 4, talking about the Messiah himself, and if we're thinking specifically about a wonderful counselor, here's what it says in verses 14 through 16. It says in verse 14 through 16, "Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin. Therefore, let us approach the throne of grace with boldness, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in times of need." You see, what we see happening here is that we have God himself who has come, experienced life and even death on our behalf, rejection and loneliness. And so he knows what it's like to experience pain. And so we can go to him, not as some distant counselor who just wants to hear our problems, but as a counselor who knows what it's like to suffer and can give us, through the power of the Holy Spirit, wisdom and guidance as we go throughout our life. Now, I don't know about you, but I think all of us can agree that there is something special about having somebody who has been through a situation similar to yours that you can learn and grow and walk through with. For example, when I was 19 years old, I lost my dad to a suicide. And then through that difficult and tragic times, it has afforded me the opportunity to also walk through suicide with other people who have survived it. And so although every situation is unique, there are many similarities into the feelings, into the frustrations, into the questions that we have when we experience the suicide of a loved one. And so because I have been through that situation myself, it has allowed me to speak with people, to talk with people, to walk with people in a way that most people who haven't experienced suicide cannot. Because I know what it's like to have questions and to have doubts and to have not quite sure what is going on. It's always special to have somebody who has gone through what you have gone through to lead you and to guide you and to walk with you, especially when life is hard. And so it's that in mind that leads us to John chapter 10, verse 27, right? This idea that Jesus is our wonderful counselor through the power of the Spirit who wants to live with us and guide us. He then says this, John 10, 27, it says this, "My sheep hear my voice. I know them and they follow me." Right? If we know God through the power and the work of Jesus and the Spirit, then we will follow him. And what this means for us, again, with this idea that God is our wonderful counselor, is a couple of things. First, this means that God cares about your suffering. God cares about your suffering. And so as you're walking through life, again, we don't have a distant counselor who's kind of uninterested in what is going on, but he knows what it's like to suffer, and he cares for you in the midst of that, which means our second point, that we ought to listen to the the counselor. Just like a wise and a good king would listen to his counsel on his court, it is a wise and a good thing for us to listen to the counselor, to listen to what Jesus might have us to do, which is why it's important for us to also be living in community. See, following Jesus is not simply an individual pursuit. This is why local church involvement and friends who also love Jesus are vitally important. We cannot follow Jesus on our own. We need community to encourage us and to celebrate and to grieve with us. And so part of listening to the counselor is taking advantages of the means of grace that he has given us to follow him. Now, following up with listening to the counselor, we also then need to do this. We need to do what the counselor says. Jesus, who is our wonderful counselor, loves us and gives us guidance through his Spirit and through the people that he has placed in our life. And we all know what it is like to have advice and not take it. I think many of our problems arise not when we're in situations where we don't know what to do, but when we are in situations when we do know what to do and yet we don't do what we're supposed to do. And so as we listen to the counselor in our life, the next step is to do what the counselor says, even when it is uncomfortable and maybe when it's something that we might not on our own choose to do. And so all of that said, what Jesus being our wonderful counselor really means for us is that we need to remember that Jesus is not an impersonal force, but a personal God. Jesus as our wonderful counselor means that he is not an impersonal, distant force who doesn't really care about what is going on in our lives, but he is a personal God who has come in the form of a man to do for us what we could not do for on our own, to suffer and die on our behalf so that anyone who would follow and trust in their wonderful counselor might receive the grace and mercy of life. Jesus is our wonderful counselor, and in this Advent season, it is a reminder to trust and to follow him so that we can experience more of his grace in our lives.